Welcome to Castlevania, a whip-cracking, knock-backing adventure released on the NES in 1986. While the legacy of this beloved adventure speaks for itself these days with its near countless sequels, another of which is releasing this year, as well as the hugely popular animes, it's worth taking a look back at the horrors that started it all. Strap in, this is gonna hurt. While side-scrolling platformers generally tend to be cartoony affairs with light, fluffy visuals or exaggerated art styles, Castlevania NES is the 8-bit equivalent of a classic Hammer horror movie, complete with every old-school monster from the land of scary stories. You'll be placed in the shoes of one Simon Belmont, a member of the Belmont dynasty, as he storms into the legendary Castlevania when it reappears after a 100-year disappearance. Thankfully, the Belmonts are hunters of vampires, so it's another day in the office. Simon will be facing all manner of freaks, from vampire bats to zombies and dreaded Medusa heads, all on his way to the top of the castle of Vania to face off against Big Chief Nosferatu himself, and send Castlevania crumbling back into the mists of legend. Now, one thing this franchise is known for, beyond its heavy reliance on monster movie imagery, is for being a bitch to see the credits of. Castlevania is a relentless monster that will throw everything it can at you in an attempt to stop you from seeing the ending, and completing it is entirely down to how much pain you can withstand before you admit defeat. This is down to multiple reasons, the most obvious of these being the Rogues Gallery. Our hero, Buff Boy Belmont, will be facing some vicious gits on his way up the castle, each of which will have complex movement patterns and attacks that will need to be learned and studied before you can progress. And I must compliment the enemy variety at this stage. Castlevania has a varied and expansive gallery of villains, from fishmen who launch themselves out of the water, axemen who chuck projectiles at 2 different heights, relentless Medusa heads that fly towards you without end, and scaly dragons that snake and slither around in the air while attacking you with fireballs. The quantity of foes is no bigger than most other NES platformers really, but it's the quality that I have to commend, and the way each of them require a different approach to defeat, forcing players to adapt to their gameplay style constantly. There's never a dull moment here. Every screen brings something new and challenging, and this is what makes Castlevania such a thrilling ride from beginning to end. By far the biggest obstacle Simon will have to contend with, however, is his own mobility, or lack thereof. While Simon may be a buff dude, he's by no means an athlete, and is nowhere near as flexible as his NES contemporaries. Simon cannot change direction in midair, he cannot adjust the height of his jump, he cannot jump on or off a staircase. He's basically me if you put me in a haunted castle, without the muscles obviously. And this makes platforming around the stages far tougher than if you were traversing the place as a slightly overweight plumber, for example. You also drop like a rock when walking off edges, so don't. Now, I don't mean this as a negative, as it's this control scheme that makes the stages and the enemy encounters as engrossing as they are. While these controls are, without question, archaic, they also help make the whole adventure incredibly satisfying to get through. This is not a platformer in the vein of Sonic or Mega Man, titles that prey on your reaction time and ability to course correct. Castlevania forces you to think ahead, to assess the situation and adjust quickly to handle it, because once you've made a move, you've committed to it completely and won't be given a second chance to fix a misaligned attack or jump. The punishment for failing to adjust is the infamous knockback. When hurt by an enemy, or by anything really, Simon will be thrown backwards into whatever hazard, foe, or pit is awaiting him. This is a classic retro platformer trapping found in a lot of 2D and 3D games, but in Castlevania, it feels particularly punishing because of the incredibly tight platforms, enemies who can overwhelm you oh so easily, and the sheer punch the knockback packs. You go flying, dude, it's crazy. It's no deal breaker by any means, and on one occasion it even saved my ass. Look, how did I do that? But it's certainly a trope I am very glad has been mostly left in the past. This strict tightness also applies to Simon's offensive options, which mainly involve using his 5-inch whip to down foes. The whip can be launched forward, and only forward, to hit enemies, and a lot of them are very mobile, either attacking relentlessly as you try to sneak in hits, or bouncing around like they're high on stimulants. There's also a small but noticeable delay between attacks of the whip, and all of this combined forces the player to use the whip wisely. Being careful to judge the best moment to crack the weapon is essential to making it out alive, and carelessly mashing the attack button will result in your foes managing to sneak in damage. The whip can be upgraded by finding other whips within candles, or very occasionally dropped by enemies, and these increase both the length and the damage output of the weapon until your next death. This idea of upgrading the whip by finding items in stages is an awesome one, but it slightly baffles me because finding these upgrades is so easy and quick that it makes me wonder why they bothered. I don't think it's ever taken me more than 30 seconds after spawning into a stage to find the 2 required whip upgrades to put the whip at its max level. These candles are literally everywhere, and the game will ensure that the upgrades are easy to recover after a death. So what's the point? Perhaps, instead of finding the upgrades this way, the bags of money you collect in stages could be used between stages to upgrade the whip in a shop or something? This way, the player could upgrade the damage output and length separately and then keep the upgrades as permanent fixtures between deaths. This may sound a bit ambitious for an NES title with no save feature or password system, but it's also a game with a currency going without a purpose other than adding to a superfluous scoring system, and unlimited continues, so there's no worry about losing your progress by being sent straight back to the title screen. But anyway, if the whip, upgraded or no, is not your style, then you can always fall back on Castlevania's range of sub-weapons. Within the castle, Simon can find daggers, holy water, or fire bombs, because Nintendo of America are pussies, axes, crosses, or boomerangs because yeah, and a magical time-stopping watch. These weapons are great for taking down enemies that may be out of range of the whip, or that are a particular pain in the rear end and need a bit of extra wallop to deal with. What I especially like about all of them is how they can fire through walls and platforms, which is sometimes great for tackling foes from a distance before moving on, or when standing on a staircase where the whip is less effective. And because each of the weapons rely on the hearts as a form of ammunition, it prevents any of them from becoming overpowered, and every use of them must be carefully considered. Like, do you want to use these weapons in the stages, or save up the hearts you collect and blast them on the boss? It is a bit weird that hearts are used for ammunition of all things, and health is found in the form of pot roasts. I can't be the only one who thought hearts were health when I first encountered this series, but whatever. I also like how the aforementioned pot roasts are found within nonchalant breakable wall blocks, meaning players will need to remember to check around when in a desperate situation, and it's never just handed over, keeping the difficulty high but giving players a chance. Back to the sub-weapons however, I do have two small complaints. The first one is a classic. I don't like how picking up a sub-weapon will automatically replace the currently held one with no chance of retrieving it. When one lands in front of you, whatever. Give it a moment and it's gone. But if one should fall out of a candle unexpectedly and land on Simon's head, then you've possibly just exchanged a great weapon for a shit one without being consulted. Later games would fix this issue by having the former weapon land on the floor ready to be retrieved, and that's great, but it's still a noticeable issue with this game. My other issue is slightly unavoidable sadly, but I don't like how they're activated by holding up on the D-pad and hitting the attack button. This can make activating the weapons quite finicky, especially when standing even somewhat close to a staircase, because holding up is how you ascend. This one is kind of unavoidable unfortunately, as we're dealing with the NES controller and its 2-button layout, so not much could really be done. Speaking of the bosses, every stage ends with a confrontation with a creature of the night. The encounters will test your timing, precision, and platforming skills as any good boss fight should, and predictably, they're all fucking nasty. Except for the first boss, this vampire bat who is really only tough because he takes a good few hits to go down, and follows a rather unpredictable movement pattern. It's a good first boss that's still a challenge, but doesn't throw new players in at the deep end. The rest of the fights ramp up the difficulty in a very smooth, very natural way that I appreciate. Queen Medusa and the mummies are really simple but challenging battles, and the fight against Frankenstein and Igor is great because there's so much to keep track of as you take them down. My only issue with this fight is that Igor is merely a distraction and hitting him does nothing at all, something I wish was communicated better to the player. Checking the health bar to see if damage is being done isn't a good idea with so much going on screen, so I wish it was made clearer which of these two you should be targeting. I honestly thought Igor was the target for a good while before turning my attention to Frankie and beating him in one. A nitpick for sure, but a valid one in my opinion. Nothing, however, could have prepared me for the fight against Death. This prick-ass bitch will float around just like previous encounters, only with the addition of 4 or 5 scythes which will move around the arena and track you down. In such a tight arena with such a beefy enemy, with a sporadic movement pattern that's hard to predict, it's very easy to lose your sanity as you get your balls handed back to you for the 100th time. I felt my sanity begin to leave my body as I came back to this bastard for another kicking over and over again. With that said, I don't think this is a bad fight at all. It's a really intense but satisfying battle that I genuinely enjoyed honing my skills on. What knocks it down a bit for me is the incredibly poor checkpointing just prior to it. If you die to this guy, the checkpoint is 2 rooms back, both of which are long, involved, and very challenging areas to retain your health points in. The area directly before it is a fucking kill box with Medusa heads and armoured knights all over the place, so I had to work my arse off to make it back to this fight with even a quarter of my health bar intact. I get that Castlevania is designed to be a tough cookie, but things like this just give off the impression that the game is only difficult because of poor stage design, and not because the thing is actually put together thoughtfully to make for a tough experience. And that sucks because the bosses here are genuinely challenging and well designed. They're perfectly orchestrated to naturally ramp up the challenge, and even though Death might be a bit of a spike in difficulty, he still manages to be a very worthwhile and satisfying encounter. Unless you have the holy water, that is. I didn't discover this until after, but this item fucking obliterates basically every single boss encounter effortlessly. Even more so if you found the double or triple shot item along the way. Now I don't hate this. I had no clue this thing was so effective on my first playthrough, so it's not like it removed the challenge on my first go. But once you do uncover the magic of this item, it kind of ruins the appeal of all the other weapons. These can all be effective against the bosses, but when the holy water can take them down so effortlessly, why would you choose anything else? This does at least depend on you actually finding the holy water and then keeping it until the end of the stage, so it's not like some weapon you always have access to, but it's insane how effective it is regardless. Before we get to the final stage of the game, a few more things to cover. Firstly, there's the graphics. For an 80s NES platformer, the environmental design of the levels here is exceptional. While most early games on this system were extremely basic design-wise, Castlevania does a fantastic job of building up the gothic atmosphere with elaborate animations for the enemies and deep, detailed backgrounds really selling the idea that you're traversing through an otherworldly castle. Bearing in mind that this is a game released in 1986, long before Nintendo's own Super Mario Bros. 2, what the devs at Konami managed to do here is miraculous. This is, without question, one of the best looking early NES titles of all time. The bright colour palette has caught me out a couple of times though. Instances such as me not knowing what is in the background and what is in the foreground were not unheard of, especially as my attention was focused squarely on the madness going on around me. And on a couple of occasions, staircases almost completely blended in with their backgrounds, making them very hard to see. Thankfully, these instances are rare exceptions. The music also follows suit. While it doesn't all hit, most of it is incredibly catchy and memorable and takes full advantage of that 8-bit NES sound chip. I don't have time for a lot, I'm trying to keep this video short, believe it or not, but here are a couple of bangers. Anyway, time for the final boss. Dracula will teleport around the room randomly, only stopping to launch a trio of fireballs in your direction, which Simon can only just about leap over. Doesn't sound too complicated? Well, try this. The only opportunity to hit the vamp is when he has his cape open and his projectiles are coming at you, and if that weren't enough, his only weakness is the head. This all results in a fight where you need to be properly precise, and a single wrong move will have you falling into his deadly fire. I really like this final battle. It requires you to exercise all of that precise jumping you've been working on throughout the rest of the adventure, and the whip needs to be used at just the right height and at just the right time to land a hit. And just in case you were wondering, Dracky doesn't give two shits about your holy water here, so don't even bother. My only issue is how Dracula can easily materialize on top of you, delivering quite a cheap hit. You'll need to stay in constant motion to avoid this, but even then, I find he can trip me up. But even with that, it's a great intense fight that's gone down as one of the toughest in video game history. Although, personally, I still think the Grim Reaper was far tougher to defeat. But once you've delivered 16 hits to Dracula's noggin, the fucker transforms into his second phase, which is, by far, a worse battle. The big blue bugger will jump towards Simon, and once again his only weakness is the head. What I hate about this is how he can so easily corner you with no chance of escape. His little jumps are impossible to walk under without damage, and the bigger jumps come with exactly no telegraph, so they're impossible to prepare for. Maybe this makes up the challenge, but in my view, this is just a really cheap encounter. Apparently, kneeling down in front of the dude causes him to perform his bigger jump, but this is not an intuitive way of dealing with the boss. Not to mention, there's far less strategy involved here. Where the first phase relied on careful timing and positioning to deliver the damage, this phase really does feel like a war of attrition where the best move is to spam the whip until he finally goes down, and pray that you can deliver enough hits before he can land on your head. Either way, after delivering a whopping 32 hits to his head, he bursts into flames. The castle crumbles for another 100 years, and Simon's adventure comes to an end. That is, until his quest 7 years later. Oh boy. I'll keep this short. Castlevania is a banging adventure. One of the most satisfying, intense, and challenging journeys you can have on Nintendo's 8-bit machine. And containing some of the best graphics, most memorable music, and toughest boss battles ever seen in 80s video games. Castlevania really stands out among its cartoonish contemporaries, and sets the template for what the horror genre would come to be for decades to come.